Welcome to Light Over Heat with Professor David Yamani. This week, I want to talk about a recent study of how race shapes people's perceptions of the January 6 events. In Light Over Heat number 32, I looked at data on the relationship between gun ownership and support for the events of January 6 and political violence more generally. Basic findings there were that gun owners were more supportive of the events of January 6 and the benefits of political violence, but the levels of support for both of those things overall were quite low. Now, some of that data in Light Over Heat number 32, which I'll link to in the show notes here, was provided to me by Ryan Jerome LeCount, who's a professor of sociology at Hamline University in Minnesota. And he recently sent me a message alerting me to the existence of a study that was published just this summer around the time that I was talking about these other data. And so let me talk today a little bit about what this particular study finds. So the basic findings here focus on one particular survey question that reads thus: what label do you think best characterizes the people who participated in the events at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, to contest the results of the presidential election? And they offer the following characterizations: extremist, protester, and patriot. So that's going to be the dependent variable in this particular study. And what they find is somewhat interesting, which is that overall, there are no racial differences in how people saw the protesters using those particular characterizations. But if you dig deeper, you do find some interesting differences. So they say the data show that views of the Capitol insurrection do not vary by race, contrary to expectations. However, there is a positive association between support for Black Lives Matter and views of January 6 participants as extremists, especially among whites. And so here, saying that whites who support the Black Lives Matter movement are more likely to see the protesters of January 6 as extremists than whites who don't support the Black Lives Matter movement. And this is controlling for other demographic factors like age, sex, education, and so on. Now, the key finding of interest to this channel is that the authors find that race and gun ownership also interact, with white gun owners an outlier in viewing the insurrection more favorably compared to whites who don't own guns. So if you want to find the group of people in this particular study who are least likely to see the protesters on January 6th as extremists, you're going to find that among white gun owners. Black gun owners, on the contrary, viewed it most negatively. Right. So if you want to find the group that saw the events of January 6th, the protesters in January 6th, most as extremists, you're going to find it among Black gun owners compared even to Black non-gun owners. And so I think this has some important implications. And one is that, as I say in Light Over Heat number 24, you can't really understand American society without understanding race. Race is so central both to our history and to our present. And this then also brings me back to Light Over Heat number 31, in which I talk about possible futures of American gun culture. And one of those futures I speculated on was a gun culture that is internally divided by things like race, also other demographics, lifestyle differences, and particularly perhaps politics. And so I think that this is a limited study. You can look at the details. I'll post a link to the actual study itself, but this is a study that is an ongoing longitudinal study of called the Project on Human Development in Chicago Neighborhoods. So it follows several birth cohorts from the city of Chicago over time. So it's not a nationally representative survey, but I don't, uh, I wouldn't doubt immediately the fact that some of these findings might be generalizable to the larger population, given what we know about race in American society, and given what some of us who have been involved in gun culture can see happening within gun culture, despite efforts to create a sort of big tent demographically in terms of diversity. There's also division within gun culture according to some of these other factors, politics being one, and to the extent that politics, of course, overlaps with race. Again, findings of this study, not surprising. It's very brief. Have a look at it yourself and let me know what you think.